Welcome to Everyday Parenting, a down-to-earth podcast presented by Bricks and Blocks Coaching. Tune in as we dive into the real-life experiences of parents. In this season, we are exploring a common emotion that most parents face: guilt. If you connect with our stories and want to hear more of them, please like and subscribe to our show. Today, in our studio, we have two wonderful parents. This is an episode I've been waiting for almost 6-7 months to record because I could not find the right guests who are willing to come and talk about the most difficult type of pregnancy, IVF. Mai and Panya, thank you so much. I really appreciate you both taking the time out and having the courage to come and talk about this difficult topic. Mai and Panya both come from multicultural families. Mai is from Vietnam and Panya comes originally from Thailand. Both of them were born in Europe. Both of them have European husbands. So a lot in common, but they did not know each other before coming to this podcast. So hi, Mai.
Hi.
Hi, Panya. So before we start, would you like to introduce yourself as parents to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned, I'm originally from Thailand, but I've been residing in Singapore for the past 7 years. I'm mama to two beautiful boys. My eldest is 3 years old, and my youngest and latest addition to the family is 5 months old. I've also recently started going back to work. I've actually been in tech for the past 10 plus years of my life, and I'm currently in the adjusting and learning phase of being a working mom of two. Very excited to be here.
Welcome.
Go you, Panya. Going back to what you got this. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Mai, and actually being on this podcast is the first time I'm identifying as being a parent because I'm only 13 weeks pregnant, but made it through the first trimester. And yes, I did IVF. It was very luckily my first attempt, but we decided to do this after, doing some testing and all of that. And fertility journey aside, I spent a decade in big tech in London and then Singapore, where my husband and I have been based for almost 4 years now. And I'm currently the co-founder of Podium, which is a connection platform for modern women in Singapore.
Congratulations, Mai, and congratulations, Panya, on the new baby. Thank you so much for taking time out. Both of you have very, very busy lives. I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us. I do hear a lot about IVF and it being a very painful process. Personally, you go through a lot of hormonal changes and difficulties. And even work-wise, there are difficulties where you have to take long times of work. Even having the conversations are also very, very difficult. So how was your IVF journey?
Yeah, so for me, my husband and I, after getting married and trying naturally for some time, ended up doing some fertility testing. And we then saw that I had low AMH, which meant that I had lower egg reserves for my age. And that plus a couple of other things made us decide to do IVF to get pregnant sooner rather than later. And from there, the journey continued. We ended up going to Vietnam to do it. My doctor in Singapore recommended that we do that if I wanted to be close to my parents. And also it was cheaper and all of that. And so that's the journey. But on to the challenges. So definitely those hormonal injections and things were pretty intense at times. Even if physically, maybe I wasn't as bloated as some women, but mentally, there were like 3 days in that period where I was injecting myself to retrieve eggs that I couldn't feel any emotion. And I had never even heard of that before. Like I didn't know hormones could do that to you. So a lot of effects from the hormones, but the emotional journey that I've been on, I think has made me more resilient for the rest of my pregnancy. For example, I feel quite excited about birth now that I feel I have some tools from my IVF journey for that. So yeah, let's see. But definitely a journey with ups and downs, but hopefully very rewarding by the end of this.
Oh, thank you. I really understand the journey that you've been through. Everybody has a different experience with IVF is what I hear. Panya, what's been your experience?
A little different to Mai. So we opted to do IVF because after 1 year of conceiving, trying to conceive naturally without positive results, we decided to conduct some testing, and it turned out both me and my husband had some underlying issues that would make it very unlikely for either of us to ever really have children naturally. We immediately took the decision to do IVF soon after, and for most part, the journey was a little bit rough. So for my first IVF cycle, during the egg retrieval process, I had a complication called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, OHSS, which affects 1 to 2% of women that undergo the egg retrieval process. And this is when your ovaries overreact to the fertility medication that you're taking. They swell up, and this leads to a variety of other complications. And this led me to be hospitalized after my first cycle, which was a little bit difficult. But perhaps to compensate, the transfer process went a lot smoother after that, and that led to the pregnancy of my first child. Thereafter, a very healthy and happy pregnancy. The second IVF journey was a little bit trickier. So I had 3 frozen embryos remaining, and I actually ended up doing 3 back-to-back transfers in the span of 4 months because we're trying to, conceive as quickly as possible. So that obviously took a toll. I was on fertility medications for 4 months straight, and that does take a toll emotionally, physically, also financially. It was an extremely stressful period, but ultimately, after the 3rd try and the very last embryo we had, we were very lucky to successfully get pregnant and have a healthy pregnancy, which led to my second child.
These are not easy experiences, How do you even not have emotions? Or going through 3 embryo replacements, transplantations, they're not easy experience. So I probably understand why it was difficult for me to find guests who would come and talk about their IVF experiences. But then, the more you share, the more awareness we create about IVF, right? So what is this inhibition or taboo amongst women who've gone through IVF to talk about their experiences?
It's a variety of different factors. I can only speak about my personal experience. My entire life, and I think most people's entire life, you have a very long-standing, decades-long assumption that when you have children, it would be via the natural route. And IVF doesn't really come into the picture at all. It felt like the ultimate curveball when the doctor said to me that day that I would not be able to do this naturally, no matter how hard I tried. And ultimately, my body wasn't doing what I expected it to do my entire life. And you begin to doubt yourself, and you question, every potentially unhealthy decision you ever made in your life. Did it contribute to the fact that your body is not working today? So you begin spiraling quite a lot. And I ultimately felt a big sense of shame that I had maybe failed my body. And that was really difficult to articulate, to admit even to myself, to articulate to others. So that's perhaps where the shame comes from.
Wow. Those are really, really tough emotions to process. Mai, was your experience also so difficult?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. I think, though, because I started going on this journey a fair few years after Panya started, things have gotten a little bit easier. But having said that, there definitely is still so much shame, it seems, because for me, even my friends who I knew had kids, some people weren't sharing it with IVF until I would share that I was on this journey. And so that's very interesting to see. But I also felt a lot of disappointment, I think, around my body not working the way that was intended, especially for women, right? Biologically, this is the sole reason we are here, to create life. And so you do feel very disappointed when you find out that you can't do it naturally. But having said that, I think living in this day and age, and as modern women who choose to also work and choose to do other things as well in life and have kids later than we used to as a human population, biologically things haven't caught up. And so now I try to tell myself it really is part of it, and we are lucky to have the science and the tools to go through this. And for me, at one point the doctor was saying perhaps things like being on the pill for a very long time could have contributed. Well, that's science too, right? If science is messing us up and if modern life is messing us up, then science can get me pregnant as well. And I will now have no shame around that. But the more we talk about it, the better.
Oh, absolutely. If technological trends are here to help us live our lives better, so there is no question that it should definitely help us in our reproductive processes as well. I would like to shift a little bit. You've shared about your personal journey and the emotions you face through, but what happens at work? every pregnant woman will have a story to share about their pregnancy. Either it's being too good to be true, where, I traveled for like 37 weeks till almost the 32nd week till the doctor allowed me, and I was just going on a full high in my career. Or you would have the other extreme where I was passed on for a promotion, and when I joined back from work, there was no support from our office, and hence I had a very tough time integrating back into work, managing a new baby. Are these experiences at work different for an IVF pregnancy as compared to a normal pregnancy?
Yeah, so I think in the early stages, it is different just because you are having to miss more work. You are having to go into the doctor's clinic a lot more for scans, for consultations, to get medication, and then not to mention the procedure. So the initial stages of trying to get pregnant, and then also of course, going through the embryo transfer and all of that stuff, yes, it is different. You're just in the doctor's clinic a lot more, either for consultation, to get medication, to get injections, or you're doing those big procedures such as an egg retrieval or an embryo transfer. And that, of course, leads to time that you miss at work and for other things as well. And I think, interestingly enough, the other difference for me was having somewhat more control over the timing, in that if you have certain quality embryo, you have like certain likelihoods of things working out, and then saying no to work or life events when you could wait a cycle, or it felt like more pressure on me at work as well as for life events. And so I would say that's the main differences.
Oh, that's interesting. So this is a pressure you've taken on yourself, not from external environment.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Panya, how was your IVF journey and work experience?
I would say that a lot of it was front-loaded, and it was most difficult during the first trimester. So the biggest difference with IVF was that I had to take more progesterone than the average woman. So I had to take progesterone supplements, but on top of that, I had to go to the hospital 3 times a week during the weekdays to get progesterone injections, on top of many, many ultrasounds. As a result, this took a fair amount of time away from work. And I was left to figure out how to balance my workload, but also the obligations of needing to physically be there to support my pregnancy. Why I was very lucky was that I was working at an e-commerce scale-up at the time, and I had a very supportive manager and extremely supportive immediate team around me. But very early on, I took the decision to be open with them about my journey and tell them this is the reason why I may not be as present as I usually am when it comes to work. And what I wanted to ask them for is not to delegate work to them, not to hand anything off to anyone else, but really, can I have flexibility instead? Could I perhaps not go into the office for this meeting and dial in? Could I perhaps give you this piece of work during the evenings rather than the workday? And that ended up working well for both of us. I was able to manage their expectations appropriately with the time and resources that I was able to give them at the time. And I felt that I wasn't sacrificing the quality for my work necessarily. What is true, though, was that I ended up working late into the evenings and weekends for quite some time. But I think that's sort of the sacrifice that sometimes women do have to make within that time period. And when I think about the output, being able to successfully have my child, I think it's all worth it.
Oh. What I hear is having conversations at work and also having conversations with yourselves make a very big difference in terms of understanding the journey or understanding the support that the women needs when they are going through an IVF process. How can we encourage more conversations and build more awareness around this IVF?
So for me, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, in that I had grown up with my entire life with the assumption that when I have children, I would do so via the natural, traditional route. I wish that IVF was taught as an alternative way to conceive at an early age, because then it becomes much more normalized. I only really knew about IVF when I entered my mid or late 20s, when my friends were starting to have children and my cousins were starting to have children. I felt that if I had that knowledge early on, it would have become much more ingrained, much more normalized in my head, and it would have been less of a shock when ultimately it came to me and having to do IVF myself.
Wow, that's a suggestion. We are talking about many topics at school level itself. So why not introduce IVF also at school levels? At the appropriate age, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Panya. You have this wide experience working with community of women, and what is it that we can do in terms of building awareness and conversations around IVF?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to this. And the first part really is trying to find those environments, those people, those communities that make you feel comfortable to speak up a bit more about your thoughts around the journey, whether you're considering it or going through it, or even wanting to look back on it. And yes, there are loads of even IVF support communities in Singapore, but women's communities help too. But that aside, it will be a difficult conversation, even if you find those people to talk to. And so I think the other part of it is putting in the work to be brave enough to talk about it. Getting yourself support in the form of, say, a therapist, a coach, or even talking to your friends first before you go to strangers so that you can handle the conversation. For me, I had a coach throughout my journey, and I did so much work to build my self-trust in order to speak about it, knowing that, I'm still on the journey, anything can happen, but I know that I'm prepared for whatever outcome, and so I can talk about it and do my part. So those are the two things, yeah.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. One of the reasons I started this passion project on Bricks and Blocks coaching is also to provide support to women, right? We need a listening ear. Families are there to support, but that's not enough. You need additional support, especially when you're going through such a tough journey in your life. It's one of the most important things that we do in our lives, right? Giving birth to children, bringing them up. So any kind of support system that you bring in to make your life easier is worth it. One last question before we end the podcast. There are many women who understand that there are these options for conceiving children, but they do not take that additional step. They're still sitting on the fence thinking about, should I go for IVF? It's such a painful process. It's going to have a side effect on my body itself. So what is your advice to these women who are sitting on the fence about IVF?
For me, it's to not only talk to ChatGPT about it. And look, I know we all talk to ChatGPT about many things. I do too on my journey. But please, not just that. Like, you've got to get out there and yes, talk to real people, either experts or people who are on the journey. Ask your friends if they know anyone. Don't just rely on the AI, even though it does know a lot. But I think having these real-life conversations really helps make that decision less scary.
And that's also your mission, right? Where you're bringing in these women and communities to come and talk to each other. I wish we build more efforts towards bringing people together in real life. Panya, what are your thoughts?
First of all, I really like Mai's comment about not going down the ChatGPT rabbit hole, because I know everyone's done that for every single topic. Maybe my input would be to not look at IVF in its entirety, because if you do, it's extremely daunting. There's the appointments, the injections, the retrieval, the transfer, the bloating, the emotions, the financial aspects. A lot of it is a lot when you look into it at once. And the way that I made it more manageable for myself was to look at everything on a day-by-day basis. So instead of thinking about the very scary retrieval that I may have 2 or 3 weeks from now, I think about today, I'm going to get an injection from my husband. That's it. Tomorrow, I'll worry about something else. And that made it a lot more digestible for me. And I think that was, a coping mechanism that really helped.
Oh, that's really nice. I remember what you said, right? How do you eat an elephant?
Yes.
Break it into small pieces and eat one piece at a time.
Exactly.
So I believe this is true for any adversity in our life, right? So if we think about the adversity in the big picture, it's really, really big. But if you break it into smaller pieces, the adversities become really digestible. So thank you so much, Panya and Mai, for coming to our show and sharing about your journey in IVF. I know it was not an easy conversation at all, but you both had the courage to come and speak up for the whole community of women who are thinking about or going through the process or have gone through the process. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Before we wrap up, don't forget to subscribe and share our content with other parents. We'd love to hear your stories, so reach out to us at bricksandblockscoaching.com. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm Shweta, a parent coach, and this is Everyday Parenting. See you next time.